All right, we're going to think back to the key of the C for a moment. We've learned the primary chords. Let me reverse this so you don't nod at me. Don't use the way I'm using my hands. I'm just trying to show you visually. We call those the G chord, the F chord, the G7. And as I think you know, the three notes in the C chord are very obvious. The F chord, the G chord. So those are what we call the primary chords in the key of C. Whatever scale we're using, it's always going to be the chord that starts with the first note of the scale, and the chord that starts with the fourth note of the scale, and the chord that starts with the fifth note of the scale. So if I think in the key of G, same pattern. The chord that begins on the first note of the scale, the chord that begins on the fourth note of the scale, and the chord that begins on the fifth note of the scale. And you're probably wondering, but that's not what they look like. True. So in the pattern that we learn, what we call the one chord, the chord that's built on the first note of the scale, is going to be in root position. The next chord, in this example, the C chord, is flipped. So here's a C chord. Flip it once, it looks like this. Flip it twice, it looks like this. And the D7 is a little more complex, but it also is flipped. Inverted is what we would say. The D is way up in top, and if you're paying really close attention, you'll know that we're using a note that isn't actually even in the D chord. It's what makes the chord a D7 chord. We can go into that more in depth. What I want to talk about, though, is the fact that those are not the only chords in the key. In fact, any chord that you can make out of scale notes belongs to the key. So we've talked about the C being important, the F chord being important, and the G chord being important. But here are other chords called secondary chords in the key. The D chord. We've played this kind of D chord before, but that's not the one we're talking about here because there are no sharps in the key of C. The E chord. We know about the F chord. We know about the G chord, the A chord, and the B chord. So in other words, in the key of C, there are 7 chords that belong: the C chord, the D chord, the E chord, the F chord, the G chord, the A chord, and the B chord. And that's the case in any key. So key of G, you've got a G chord, an A chord, a B chord, because G has a sharp in it. All Fs will be sharped wherever you find them. So B chord, C chord, we know about that one, D chord, E, and F sharp. 7 chords in that key too, named after each note of the scale. Now in a major key, those 3 primary chords in the key of G, it would be G, C, and D7, are all major, but the others are not. Some of them are minor, one of them is diminished. We'll get into that another time.